Thank you for hosting this hearing this evening. I am with the Sentencing Project, which is a national group headquartered in Washington, D.C. We do research and advocacy, and were founded in the mid-'80s. For them, I'm the Advocacy Director, and my focus is on state advocacy. And I'm here in support of the Release Aging People in Prison campaign, whom I've worked with for several years, and have been state partners in our work around ending mass incarceration and addressing the United States punitive criminal justice system. At the end of last year, we launched a national campaign to end life imprisonment, and the work that RAP is doing here in New York and the priorities they highlighted earlier are key policy recommendations and at the forefront of a national conversation around ending punitive sentencing and addressing life imprisonment. And we are here in full support of their recommendations, including the work that you all can do in this committee to fully fund the Parole Commission and other work that this committee has the capacity to take on. You know, given that this is a budget hearing and there were savings that were highlighted earlier, if the parole recommendations are fully implemented, I want to highlight that if decarceration is achieved, if mass incarceration is reduced, that will free up resources that can fully fund and support the other issues that have been surfaced during the hearing this afternoon. And so I hope that as budget leaders that you all also consider how reducing mass incarceration and scaling back punitiveness can help free up those resources. As a national organization, we often highlight New York because it is among a handful of states that has decreased its rate of incarceration by more than 30% since the late 90s when the state prison population peaked, and that is important. But as you also heard, New York has one of the highest populations of people sentenced to life prison terms. And in fact, even though the state has reduced its rate of incarceration by more than 30% since the late 90s, the rate of incarceration, the people who are in prison, is still more than double where it was in the early 1980s. So even though New York is at the top of the list in terms of decarceration, the levels of incarceration in 2019 are still far higher than they were in the early 80s, when at that time, nationally, the United States still had the highest rate of incarceration when compared to other Western nations. So in order for the state to fully challenge mass incarceration, move the needle back to the early 80s, which is still something that far exceeded where other Western nations were, really looking at long imprisonment and life in prison and addressing parole can help further efforts around mass incarceration and reducing levels of incarceration here in New York, and hopefully help center that part of the conversation in terms of these efforts nationally. It's my hope that if we're successful, if New York can further decarcerate, if that can influence the national conversation in other parts of the country, that this will free up resources and other public monies can be directed into efforts to prevent crime to begin with, and certainly to reduce returns to prison for justice-involved residents who are released not just after long prison terms, but even after short stays in jail or prison. The Sentencing Project is a national organization, as I shared earlier. We're here to be a resource, not just to our state partners with the Release Aging People from Prison campaign, but also we work often with state lawmakers as well. And if you all have any questions, even following this session, I'm happy to be connected to you and provide any answers to any questions that you may have. So I'll wrap up my comments there. Thank you all for hosting this hearing, and I was glad to sit through it and learn a little bit more of New York. This is my first time in Albany, and welcome. So it's, you know, it was interesting to sit here this afternoon and learn a little bit more about New York while I was listening to the other folks participate in the hearing. So thank you all for hosting it.
Thank you. You might not get out as easily as you think.
I know. Luckily, I rented a hotel room, so we'll be okay.
Any senators have any questions? Assembly? Yeah. Well then, thank you very much for your testimony. And I believe this brings to a close our public protection hearing.